Hello, Cliff Stanwyck. This is the first in a series of California Association of Real Estate Forms for Sellers. This is the listing agreement package revised June of 2022. Hello, and welcome to my, explanation of the California Real Estate Listing Agreement. And I'm going to start off with my disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by me do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Real Estate Fixed Inc., who the speaker is employed by. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. And I need to do this because we're not attorneys. And part of my challenge of doing this, the reason why I am going through and going over the residential listing agreement, is because the way it usually works is sellers never see this until in the middle of a listing presentation, and the agent thinks it's going really well and you think it's going really well, and then all of a sudden they do what they're supposed to do. We're supposed to ask you for the listing, and they ask you for the listing and they ask you to sign a listing agreement, and you've never seen this form, and C.A.R in its infinite wisdom has made this form into not only the listing agreement but a whole bunch of topics talking about agency and wire fraud and housing discrimination and seller advisory and the actual listing agreement. And it's something that, again, that even in the agreement that I'm going to go over, it's a bundle, it's a real estate listing agreement bundle. You're going to find out that it's not just a simple check, initial, sign, check, initial, sign, initial, check. It's a lot of information. So I'm hoping to essentially present the listing agreement here, which again is 14 pages long. And there's a lot of stuff that starts off, and you probably necessarily haven't Googled it, but you probably are gone out and said searching, hiring a listing agent, and what you should look for in a listing agent, and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, there's some information out there. This is from HomeLight, which is a big aggregator. It kind of helps agents get listings, or buyers or sellers. And it talks about the listing agreement. What is a listing agreement? And it talks about 3 types of listing agreements. And the first thing I want to share with you is you don't get a choice of 3 types of listing agreements. You get the exclusive right to sell agreement. I don't have any opportunity to offer you any more than an exclusive right to sell agreement, which means, again, legal disclaimer, long story short, when I put your house on the market and you agree to let me sell your house, anyone who buys that house, even if it's your next door neighbor, even if it's your best friend, even if it's your cousin who's now relocating to your town, you are paying me the commission set forth in this agreement, okay? You don't get to do an open listing, which is basically I'm not listing it with anybody, but if someone brings me a buyer and they complete the transaction, I will pay them X amount of dollars, right? So it goes on and on about these listing agreements. You don't get a choice of an open or an exclusive agency. What's an exclusive agency agreement? Well, an exclusive agency agreement is essentially one where if you, as a seller, bring somebody to buy the house, the listing agent doesn't get paid, right? So I don't want to, make this a real big mess. Here's Rocket Mortgage, a real popular website. It's like what's included in a listing agreement, and this again talks about a lot of things, but each listing agreement will vary slightly. I would share with you that in California, there is not a lot of few general guidelines. It is very explicit. California, again, has taken it upon itself, the Association of Realtors, to work very closely with the lawyers in the state so that agents don't get needlessly sued because they've written a null or void contract in the transfer of real estate. So again, our agreement is very comprehensive. It has a lot of small print, a lot of stuff to read. And like I said, you've been with this agent for an hour. They've told you all the right stuff. At least you think they told you the right stuff. Now you're going to sign a contract to sell the house. And what are all those terms? And so, again, that's part of the challenge here of this business is essentially what are you signing? And that's what I'm really trying to help with these videos. My goal is to help you deep dive into really what you're signing here, because there's a lot of responsibilities for your listing agent, and there's a lot of responsibility for you as a seller, and there's a lot of fancy words like fiduciary duty and material fact and all sorts of terms and conditions. And there's a lot of information in the listing agreement itself that you shouldn't gloss over, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the agreement, and I want to go over a couple things because I think it's pretty important. And it starts right with the agency agreement. So let's talk about the first thing that happens. Again, this is 14 pages long. I'm just going to scroll through it so you can just see how long it is. And you can see how much I've highlighted. I'm trying to highlight quite a few things. There's a fair housing and discrimination advisory. Okay. There is the possible representation of one or more buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. You have to consent to that. Okay. That's another piece, right? There is the wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. There is then, we finally get to the residential listing agreement, exclusive authorization and right to sell. This is what you will see if you are dealing with an agent in MetroList and working in South Placer or I would say the 7-county area and the California Association of Realtors. We don't have any other choice here. We just have this form, okay? And it is 5 pages long. And chances are you're going to be signing this thing in less than a half an hour. So what are you signing, right? This is what we're talking about. What are you signing? And then the last form is the seller advisory, which again is talking about what, again, you need to do as a seller. This is going over, to be frank, this is going over all the duties and responsibilities that not only your real estate agent has, but the duties you as a seller has. And this is not trivial, okay? It's not trivial. So a couple things I wanted to talk about was, first of all, you know, what is a fiduciary duty, right? So let's go look at the screen again. What is the fiduciary duty? A person or organization that makes financial decisions on behalf of another party who is legally obligated to act in their client's best interests. The most common example that I can share with you, it is not in your best interests to have me list your property for a high price that won't sell in what a typical house will sell in the market. If the average time on market for a new listing is 20 days in the contract, my job should be to discourage you or to educate you that this price will not sell your house in a timely manner. If it does not sell in a timely manner, these are your impacts, right? So again, you know, we talk about what a fiduciary responsibility is. And essentially a duty, this is from the National Association of Realtors. It hasn't changed since 2013, May 15, 2013. A real estate broker who becomes an agent of a seller or buyer, either intentionally or through the execution of a written agreement or unintentionally by a course of conduct, will be deemed to be a fiduciary. Fiduciary duties are the highest duties known to the law. Classic examples of fiduciaries are trustees, executors, and guardians. As a fiduciary, a real estate broker will be held under the law to owe certain specific duties to his principal, in addition to any duties or obligations set forth in the listing agreement or other contract of employment. These special fiduciary duties include loyalty, confidentiality, disclosure, obedience, reasonable and diligent care, reasonable care and diligence, and accounting. All right, these are what the fiduciary responsibilities of your agent is. So it's basically, we have all these responsibilities, and it's, again, not something to be taken lightly, right? Another thing is this thing comes up of material facts, all right? And what are material facts? Material facts are simply anything which affect the value, desirability, and intended use of the property. If someone is buying the property and they want to build an additional dwelling unit, and then you as a seller know that an ADU can't be built on it, that's a material fact. If an ADU can be built on it, that's a material fact. A sewer or septic issue would be a material fact. Any non-permitted work would be a material fact, because the seller is done something that hasn't been permitted, and the buyer, once that property is transmitted or transferred, now has the probably the financial and legal obligation to now get it permitted, right? So these are all the stuff. And just to share with you, this is just about disclosures, like, which we will dive into. There's a 79-page PDF on disclosures, right? These are all the stuff that, again, we need to discuss, that you're in this listing agreement, and you've had this listing presentation. You've probably talked to 2 or 3 agents, hopefully. Maybe you're only talking to one. Well, now we're doing what is known as the presumptive close. We're asking you to sign this agreement. What are you signing, right? And the chances are, I guarantee you, that you could spend hours looking at this. And to be frank, you have the right to have this reviewed by a lawyer if you don't understand it. And again, we're not supposed to give you legal advice and tell you it's okay to sign. So a lot of times it's just on essentially, good intentions that this agreement is signed. And so I wanted to really deep dive into this thing and kind of go over it. It's probably going to be a little longer than I wanted, but I think it may have you may see some things that I find very interesting, and some of my biases, and it may just make you think. So we're gonna hop in to the residential listing agreement. So the first form is you're entering into an agency relationship, meaning that you're going to essentially engage this agent to be your representative to sell your house. Basically, the first sentence is, when you enter into a discussion with a real estate agent regarding the real estate transaction, you should from the outset understand what type of agency relationship or representation you wish to have with the agent in the transaction. It's highly doubtful that after the listing presentation, which we've told you how great we are and what your house is worth, that you may have everything you need to understand in this agreement. But the first part is, let's talk about a seller's agent. A seller agent under the listing agreement with the seller acts as an agent for the seller only, meaning we're not negotiating, we're representing. A seller's agent or a sub-agent of the agent has the following affirmative obligations. To the seller, a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with the seller. That means that we're not going to lie for you if it violates the housing laws, if it's something that is a material fact, but we do need to be loyal and we do need to be honest with you. Pricing your home may be the first test of the honesty, by the way. So, to the buyer and the seller, diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in performance of the agent's duties. So, what does that mean? Hopefully that means they're a full-time real estate agent and they have some transactional volume or expertise that they have validated or, shown you enough that you believe that they have the reasonable skill and care. A duty of honest and fair dealing and good faith. Okay, again, that's a mouthful as well. And then first and foremost, a duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property that are not known to or within the diligent attention and observation of the parties. An agent is not obligated to reveal to either party any confidential information obtained from any other party that does not involve the affirmative duty set forth above. Meaning you can't go to somebody and say, hey, don't tell anyone, but unfortunately, once you tell your agent something that is a material fact, they need to disclose that. An agent, once they find something that is a material fact, doesn't go back to one of the parties, the buyers or agents, and say, I found this and now we're not going to tell the other party. Again, it needs to be disclosed to everybody, and those usually come out of agent inspections and or property inspections. And to be frank, a lot of times when there's a home inspection done and there's a disclosure and some things show up that should have been disclosed or should have been obviously disclosed, we start seeing a little bit of friction and what I like to call fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We put the transaction in a lot of trouble. So again, this whole fiduciary responsibility to do what's in your best interest, I definitely have some things that I think is in the best interest, and it's in the listing agreement, and we'll wait till we get there. So let's continue. So we haven't even gotten past the first paragraph, right? So again, this is a form that you should read to beginning to end. If you need a copy of it, contact me and I will be glad to send you this one. Seller and buyer responsibility. Either the purchase agreement or a separate document will contain a confirmation of which agent is representing you and whether the agent is representing you exclusively in the transacting action or acting as a dual agent. Please pay attention to the confirmation to make sure it accurately reflects your understanding of your agent's role. The above duties of an agent in a real estate transaction do not relieve the seller or buyer from the responsibility to protect his or her own interests. You should carefully read all agreements and assure that they adequately express your understanding of the transaction. I find that really, really key, that you really need to understand what you're signing, okay? And don't just trust your agent that it's okay. That's where things get really sideways. And the dual agency is not anything you should take super lightly as well. It's something where, again, you'll see in the forum, there's some things that you may or may not want to do. So let's hop back into it. So the law requires each agent with whom you have more than a casual relationship to represent you with this disclosure form. You should read its contents each time it is presented to you and consider the relationship between you and the real estate agent for your specific transaction. And then you're basically includes provisions of some code here, some civil code, and then it's also a receipt of disclosure and portions of the printed code printed on the second page. Here's the amusing part. The amusing part is you don't even initial the second page. So I highlighted a couple sections. It gets back into some things that you should be looking at, is that listing agreement means a written contract between the seller of real estate and an agent by which the agent has been authorized to sell the real property or to find or obtain a buyer including rendering other services for which a real estate license is required to the seller pursuant to the terms of this agreement. Seller's agent means the person who has obtained a listing of real property to act as an agent for compensation. Listing price is the amount expressed in dollars in which the seller is willing to sell the real property through the seller's agent. That means basically if you get a, you get a price on a contract, that you should be willing to sign it. Now, obviously, that's subject to terms. Again, there's a whole bunch of stuff to read here and in much smaller type. And again, you don't even initial this page, but it talks an awful lot about our compensation, okay? So let's look at the next form that you'll be signing, and that is the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. So essentially, equal access to housing for all. All housing in California is available to all persons. Now, that doesn't mean that anyone who cannot qualify their financial abilities or, have the ability to purchase it is that it's available, but you can't necessarily not allow people based on some protected classes, which are race, sex, sexual orientation, gender, marital status, familiar status, citizenship, immigration status, primary language, whether military or veteran, source of income, medical condition, disability, genetic information, criminal history, any arbitrary characteristic, okay? And in this form, this is, again, something that has quite a bit of information, goes across the Federal Housing Act, goes across the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, goes with the California Unruh Civil Rights Act, American with Disabilities Act, other fair housing laws. It talks about examples of conduct, which I think is kind of helpful here, that may not be motivated by discriminatory intent, but could have a discriminatory effect. Basically, prior to an acceptance of an offer, asking for an offering buyer personal information or letters from buyers, especially with photos, those types of documents inadvertently reveal or perceived as revealing protected status information, thereby increasing the risk of actual or unconscious bias and potential legal claims against the sellers and others by buyers, prospective buyers whose offers were rejected. So your agent probably should tell you no buyer letters, right? Basically, there's also examples of unlawful and improper conduct. Refusing to negotiate for a sale, rental, or financing, otherwise make housing opportunity available, failing to present offers due to a person's protected status. Your agent should present all offers, and you should reject those offers if they're unacceptable to you. It's just the right thing to do. Refusing to failing to show, rent, or sell or finance housing, channeling or steering, blockbusting, making a statement or advertisement that indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination. Really careful in your listing to say that this is perfect for, multi-generational families. Probably should be multi-generational housing or just multi-generational, whatever that means, right? Again, being careful about what's in there and being discriminatory is something that this form talks about. And it also talks about proactive practices and fair housing standards and a lot of stuff. And essentially, you as a buyer and the seller are going to sign this agreement. And a lot of times that one of the biggest issues is if a real estate license is involved. If it is involved, then you're dealing with a lot of these housing acts, and it's part of the legal responsibilities of selling your house. Let's talk about probably one of the more confusing pieces, which is this possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. Okay, so this is more complicated than it appears. If you go with a very large brokerage, chances are they are going to tour your home, and essentially you're listing your home with a brokerage. You're having that agent from the brokerage represent you. So you're listing your house with a brokerage. That means that if any buyers come from another agent with that brokerage, you have created dual agency, because the buyer's agent and the selling agent is from the same brokerage, right? So that may or may not be an issue, and you need to understand that. What you may want to exclude is the representation of your listing agent representing a buyer's agent or a buyer. You may think it's okay for the agent to have that person represented by another buyer's agent. Now, can that buyer's agent be with that same brokerage, or does it need to be outside of the brokerage? Is there a discount given if that happens to the listing, because the brokerage is representing the buyer and the seller? So that starts the whole discussion of the fact that the commissions are negotiable, right? And I don't want to go down there, but one of the things I really want to point out here on this form is this thing. Offers not necessarily confidential. Buyer is advised that seller or listing agent may disclose the existing terms and condition of buyer's offers unless all parties and their agents sign a written confidentiality agreement. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as current market conditions, the prevailing practices in real estate community, the listing agent's market strategy, and the instructions of the seller. Okay, confidentiality agreements. Do you want to sign one? Do you want to make sure, like, the seller's agent should not be disclosing any offers and terms from other offers? They should probably just be saying there's multiple offers, or maybe you don't even want them telling anyone that you have multiple offers. Maybe you want basically confidentiality, and basically to say that the seller has informed me that he wants or they want no discussion of any offers that have been made, received, or countered, or any information. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want to protect too much talk. Okay, and again, the confidentiality agreement is not a simple thing. If I send the offer over with a confidentiality agreement and it's not signed before the offer is sent over, is any of the information on that offer confidential? In my opinion, it isn't. Okay, the intent was for it to be confidential, but you let me see the offer before I basically executed a confidentiality agreement. This again gets back to the competence and care of the agent that you're hiring, whether it's a listing agent or a buyer's agent. If you want a confidentiality in any offers that you make, you need to explain how that's going to be handled by the agent that you've engaged, right? So again, I just like to point this out. Dual agency is complicated. Confidentiality of agreements are complicated. It's not as simple as you think. These are things that you need to be aware of, and we still haven't even gotten to the listing agreement. So let's continue. So the next thing that comes up is wire fraud, electronic funds transfer advisory. Unfortunately, the age of the internet has created some bad actors, and these bad actors are fishing for personal information. They know that your property has been listed on the MLS. They may call you up and say, hey, we're from the Homeowners Association. We need you to send us some money. We'd like you to wire transfer it or electronically send you some money to get these HOA forms done. Again, this is just pointing out to you that you really need to be advised about how you do this. And for the most part, the escrow company can handle a lot of these HOA docs and paying for other fees. And then again, when they have their own process for wire transfers and electronic funds transfer, and you should understand those. And hopefully the agent you've employed has gotten you set up with an escrow company before the house is listed, so some of these items can be discussed. So again, the wire transfer thing is something that both the buyers and sellers are going to sell. So after much paperwork, we are finally at the residential listing agreement. And again, I just want to say, I am not offering legal advice. This is material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. And we're going to hop into the 5-page residential listing agreement. And I think, again, the point that I am pointing out to you is most of the time, the way most sellers are exposed to this form are you've had a listing presentation and the listing agent has answered a lot of questions and feels like you're going to list the house with them, and that means they need a listing agreement. And if they're good, and I hope you're interviewing someone who is going to ask you for the business, right? You've had a listing presentation, you've had a market analysis, you've discussed what you think the house is worth, you've come to a meeting of the minds that this is the price for the home. The agent seems to be reasonably competent and has C.A.R. and has proven to you that they are a professional, and now they're asking you for the business, and they're going to go, am I the one you would like to sell your house, Mr. Seller and Mrs. Seller? And you say yes, and they say, well, let's sign the listing agreement and let's get down the road. So this is the residential listing agreement. So the first thing you're going to notice is that it will have your name, and again, you are employing the broker, not the agent. And there is a beginning date and there is an ending date, very important. And there will be the address, and there'll be basically where the city is, the county, and also there used to be a place where we used to put the APN on it, but I see they have kind of removed that. There is the APN. So basically, there's a couple questions here. Obviously, if it's a mobile home, there's a different addendum, and if it's a probate, it's a probate listing is a whole different addendum. And a probate is something that I would advise find somebody who specializes in doing probate listings. They are a very long process because most of the authority to sell and to negotiate is run through the legal system and the courts. So the first thing is you're going to have a listing price and the listing terms. And these terms can be for anything that you have negotiated, sometimes you might see a transaction fee. There's a host of things, but there may be some other terms. But what I really want to talk to again is I want to talk to about the fact that this is a exclusive right and authorization to sell. So that means that the seller agrees to pay broker as compensation for services irrespective of agency relationships. So basically, you're going to pay that agent for anyone who submits an offer and attempts to buy your home during the property during the listing period. And then the next part is you are going to, and the thing I should have written is the amount or rate of real estate commission is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable, maybe, not are, may be negotiable between the seller and broker. Real estate commissions include all compensation and fees to brokers. So everything that is paid to a real estate agent goes through their broker and then is dispersed to the agent who actually did the work. So you cannot make any direct payments to your agent. You should not be giving your agent any money unless you have some agreement to do that, either in an email or something. And again, depending on that, it's really fraught. Any sort of, in my opinion, any sort of reimbursement should really be done through escrow, and because the broker is going to see the final statement, or I shouldn't say the final statement, it's going to see the preliminary statement, or have is going to be able to make a judgment on that, whether that's a thing that's acceptable or not. But anyway, let's just keep going here. So again, that's the first part, is you're going to pay the broker for any purchase and transfer of that property during the listing period. And so if during the listing period, any extension, broker, cooperating broker, seller, or any other persons procures a ready, willing, and able buyer who's offered to purchase the property on any price and terms, is accepted by the seller, provided the buyer completes the transaction or is prevented from doing so by seller, broker is entitled to compensation whether the escrow resulting from such offer closes during or after the expiration, listing period, or extensions. Long story short, what we're saying is that if this broker brings a willing and able buyer and then you decide to change your mind in the middle of it, you may owe that broker a commission. Again, I'm trying to avoid the fact that you've had this great meeting with an agent, you think the agent is competent, now all of a sudden you're signing 14 pages that you probably are going to have some questions on, and you probably need to have the time to review it. Now, obviously, what you can do is you can ask the agent to send you a DocuSign, and you can review all the documents prior to signing them on your computer, and you can print them out. You don't need to sign it before he leaves the house or she leaves the house, right? But anyway, this is the complexity of real estate. There's 14 pages, of which 5 pages are this listing agreement. Do you fully understand what you're signing? Because at the end of this thing, you're signing this thing and saying that you do. So again, let's just keep working through this. So we talked about the listing period. Now, if there's also a thing as a safety period, that after the end of the listing, which is number 2 here, I haven't mentioned most of it, but they can also, after the termination of the listing, they can call for a safety period, which is could be 30, 60, 90 days, where somebody who tried to buy the house just didn't like your agent, withdrew their offer because they found out the listing agreement was expiring. And by the way, they can find out when your listing agreement expires. And they wait for this agent to go away, and then they come back and they buy it with a new agent, but they saw the house with the old agent, and the old agent said, this buyer, I was a procuring cause, and I don't even want to go down to procuring cause rat hole, but they're the ones that the buyer who makes this offer now, even though you have a new listing agent, they need to get compensated. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to pay 2 commissions. It just means that the commission is going to be paid to the procuring cause. Now, again, not legal advice, but what will happen most of the time is there's going to be a big brouhaha between which broker, listing or selling agent brokerage is entitled to the commission, and it's probably just going to close. If it doesn't close, then you have a complaint. But again, this is something you need to understand. And what normally should happen is that the listing agent should provide you a list of people who saw the house and basically let you know who they think did see the house. That's not an easy thing to do, because if you run an open house, you're not necessarily going to know everyone that came in the house. But again, right, we spend a lot of time in this agreement talking about getting us paid. And it's pretty much like, you're going to pay us, you're going to pay us, you're going to pay us, you're going to pay us. The reality of it is your selling agent needs to really close the transaction, and they need to do a good job. And most of the times, if there's a ton of friction or just a bad relationship, most parties are going to figure out a way to part amicably. All right, so let's keep going. So essentially, seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the property unless the property is transferred to any of the following individuals or entities. Now, here's your opportunity here to exclude potential buyers. All right, say your next door neighbor has been talking to you about selling the house, and you want to exclude that buyer from the agreement. That's where you do it. Say you want to exclude it to any family members, or you want to renegotiate something. Now, this again gets complicated, right? Because you need to think about, well, what happens if that agent has a lot of costs with the marketing of your property and the efforts that they have done to market it? Should there be some reimbursement? But that is the part of the form where you could basically exclude the compensation or renegotiate the compensation, right? And basically it goes into, if property is sold to anyone listed above during the time seller is obligated to compensate another broker, broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement, and broker is not obligated to represent seller in such transactions. So if that happens, your agent is now not going to represent you. So just be aware that if there is some exclusions, or it ends up you really didn't like your agent, and then the agent came in, or the brokerage had a procuring cause and a buyer to do it. Again, you should explore your options of, do you have to work with that agent? Because again, you signed an agreement with a broker, right? I know I'm going down into a little bit of a rat hole here with some of these conversations, but here's my point, okay? And I'm going to kind of streamline it from here. There's a lot of questions, and you need to have the answers, and you need to fully understand this agreement before you sign it. And I guarantee you probably haven't seen this agreement until it's time to sign the agreement. And if there's any pre-sales material, a smart agent will probably throw the listing agreement in there, right? In case, and ask you if you have any questions. But if you don't have any questions, there should be a follow-up and say, well, have you fully read and understand the listing agreement? And if they say yes, then I think I've done a certain amount of utmost care, and I can probably pursue asking you to sign that agreement, right? So again, it would be great if the world worked like this, right? But it doesn't, right? This is a 14-page agreement. Know what you're signing. And I'm just giving you some examples of the rat holes that can go down. And I'm trying to share with you that you're signing an agreement to sell your house, and you're paying somebody 5 or 6% of the amount of the sale of that house, and you should have a crystal clear understanding of what the responsibilities and duties that you have, and what the agent working for you has. And then if there's any financial or legal implications of the house being sold, you need to also consult a professional, and that is not your real estate agent. So let's hop back into it. So another thing is that's usually a big surprise is items excluded and included unless otherwise specified in the real estate purchase agreement. All fixtures and fittings, what are those, that are attached to the property are included, and personal property items are excluded from the purchase price. So a fixture is anything attached to the house. Think of chandeliers, think of speakers that are in your house. Now, the mounting brackets a lot of times are left. If it's like a picture, that's not a fixture because it's removable. So a lot of times, if it is ordinarily in the course something that would be removable, it probably doesn't stay with the house. But again, if you have a heirloom or something that is really important to you, like for example, a door that has the height of small people on the back of it, and you want to take that door with you, you should exclude that and say you're going to replace it, or you should replace it before you go on market. And again, these are things that people are going to come to your house, they see this beautiful chandelier, and then you all of a sudden in the purchase agreement have said the chandelier isn't going. That becomes a problem. It needs to be negotiated, it needs to be replaced, or is it going to be replaced with something of your choosing, or are you going to credit the buyer? It opens again a whole bunch of conversations that you don't want to have. So it's really important that you understand when you're listing your house what is excluded and included. All right. Another thing that the seller intends that the above items be excluded or included in offering the property for sale, but understands that the purchase agreement supersedes any intentions expressed above and ultimately determine which items are excluded and included in the sale, and broker is not responsible for nor guarantees that the above exclusions or inclusions will be in the purchase agreement. Again, this is something that your agent needs to make sure is excluded. It should be in the MLS. It should be potentially in a counteroffer or in an addendum form. If it hasn't been clearly signed, you may want to have in your seller instructions, have that item noted and in the MLS. Again, this gets back to questions and how is your agent going to handle it, and the competency of your agent during this process of listing your house and selling your house and the pre-sale stuff. Again, these are all the questions that are on the listing agreement, and hopefully after the great presentation of how great they are and how they see the value of your house and how they're going to market your house, that you really understand that the iceberg of this job is stuff that is on the duties and responsibilities, especially in regards to disclosures and the communication of information and the information that you want to be communicated, right? Again, you may want some of this stuff public, you may not want it public, but you may want it understood. So do we have it public facing that the chandelier stays, or do we have that part of the MLS instructions? And then again, these are all the little pieces of the art of the deal and the art of selling your house, right? So let's continue to go into this thing. So the next thing that's really important is you knowing which items are leased and not owned by you, and then the following items have been financed and a lien placed on the property to secure payment. Most of those come down to some home improvement stuff. It could be solar, it could be your heating and air. These are the things we're talking about: alarm systems, propane tanks, water softener. A lot of times you need to think about these things. Seller, and then also you have an obligation to provide to buyer as part of the sales agreement copies of lease documents or other documents obligating seller to pay for any such leased or lien item. A lot of that comes down to solar power systems, and if you have a solar power system, it's really important to have a discussion about it, whether it's owned whether it's leased, and again, if there's been any issues with the system as well, because that would come under a material fact. All right, so now we get into talking about the multiple listing service, and that's basically the database of properties that are for sale and available and disseminated and accessible by all of the real estate agents who participate or subscribe to the MLS. Now, first of all, this is essentially the launch point for your listing, okay? It will go well beyond the MLS, because the MLS has third-party agreements to allow the marketing of these listings to other areas. Like, for example, Realtor.com is nationwide. When somebody from Tennessee is looking for your house in California, they are going to find it not on MetroList, which is the MLS that I'm a participant and broker of, but they're going to find it on Realtor.com, or they're going to find it on Zillow. Now, important, so that you should know, is the exposure to the buyers through the MLS. And then right now, whether or not, a lot of challenges people listing their houses, will it be on Zillow? Okay, and at MetroList, you have to opt in to Zillow advertising. So if the agent doesn't have his listings on Zillow, they will have to opt in. They're not automatically put on Zillow, for example. They will go on Realtor.com because there is a co-marketing agreement. They will go on. Every agent who works in the MLS will have a copy of the listing through the MLS agreement. And again, it's important to know what information is disseminated on the MLS. And so we go off and we talk about that. All terms of the transaction, including sales price and financing, if applicable, will be provided to the MLS to which a property is listed for publication, dissemination by use of person, entities, items approved by the MLS and may be provided to the MLS. This is a lot of stuff, right? And we should be telling you which MLS we're part of. And then we have the benefits of using the MLS and impact or opting out of the MLS. If you're opting out of the MLS, then you're basically hoping that your agent sells this house. This is basically, the MLS is, in most cases, is 99% of the activity of buyers coming through your house is going to be on the MLS. It's my opinion. You should list your house and publish it to the internet. Now, you can opt out of not publishing it to the internet, and it will show up on agents only, and that may be something you want to do. But then you need to make sure that your agent has a plan to do in your best interest of how are they going to promote this listing to the agent community and do the right stuff. So again, here's something that has come out because of pocket listings, and it's called clear cooperation. MetroList does not participate in clear cooperation, but meaning that you can actually do pocket listings, and I won't get down there too long. But one of the issues that you have is we do not have a coming soon impact on days on market, right? Basically, if you do a coming soon and you have a listing agreement, and it's there's a listing agreement and there's a basically a days on market, all right? And so at the end of the day, when you sign the listing agreement, unless you do an MLS waiver, the days on market are being counted. Now, when you do a waiver, then it's going to go out with day zero because you have a waiver that it's not on market. But it also means that if you're in a place with clear cooperation, that you can't necessarily go out and, because it's not on the MLS, you can't go out and do some coming soon stuff. So again, the seller instructs the buyer to market the property to the public, to start the marketing on the beginning of this agreement or whatever. So we can set that delayed thing, and then we put a waiver into MLS and everything goes down the road. Or the seller instructs broker not to market the property to the public. You have that choice as well, right? So again, clear cooperation policy does not apply. That is something that our MLS allows that you don't. They're not they're not lockstep with the clear cooperation. At least it was last time I checked. Now here's another part: MLS data on the internet. That is the stuff you see on the Zillow and everything else. There's also feature opt-outs like display the property listing or have the features below. Opt-outs apply to websites or electronic displays, and subscribers who are participant or agent members that other internet sites may not have the features set forth herein, and that the broker nor the MLS have the ability to control or block such features and other internet sites. So again, this gets into what is the information. A lot of people get upset that their house is sold and there's still pictures on Zillow. If that is something that you have a problem with, then you are challenged with, or the buyer needs to do. Those are things, again, that can be addressed. You can at least block the feed of those photos, meaning at the end of the listing, you can delete all the marketing information, the public marketing information and the photos and the virtual tour and everything like that. Now, here's something that's pretty important, and it gets back to seller representations. All right. So again, sellers have a lot of duties. Okay, more so than your agent isn't going to do it all. It may appear that way, but it really isn't. But one of the more important things, and this gets back into material facts that we covered off on the beginning, anything that impacts the value or perceived value to a potential buyer is a material fact. And this is also some information that probably impacts your ability to sell this home, because it's going to give some information that may not be beneficial in your best interest. And what I'm talking about is like a foreclosure or a notice of default or a short sale or something like that. So there's this thing where you're basically giving a representation that, unless otherwise specified in writing, seller is unaware of any notice of default recorded against the property, any delinquent amounts due under any loan secured by or other obligations affecting the property, any bankruptcy, insolvency, similar proceedings affecting the property, any litigation, arbitration, administrative action, government investigation, or other pending or threatened action that affects or may affect the property's or seller's ability to transfer, any current pending or proposed special assessments affecting the property. Seller shall promptly notify broker in writing if seller becomes aware of any of these items during the listing periods or extension thereof. So promptly notify, that's basically immediately. And these are things like, if there's any sort of dissolution in a relationship, if there's any pending lawsuits or litigation and the property was part of a collateral agreement. These are all the things you have to be able to sell this property, long story short. And we don't want any surprises like in the middle of the escrow, your solar companies coming out and they're taking back the panels for non-payment, right? We want to know what we're selling and any conditions. And I try to share this with people all the time. Challenges or issues or problems that you think are going to be problematic in the sale of your home are usually not problems for an offer, because you got the offer with these things being disclosed or known. What really becomes problematic is when people find out, oh, you need a rent back. Oh, I haven't paid my property taxes, okay? And now, it's possibly now that the purchase price is not enough. You've negotiated an offer where there's going to be a short payoff, meaning that the house can't transfer. These are all the things where I can't share enough or can't, explain enough. No one has a problem, in my opinion, of doing this for 19 years, of working through issues and problems with selling a house. However, it becomes very problematic when they buy your house and problems are disclosed to them, or more importantly, they're found by them, or additional information that would have been really helpful before they made the purchase offer was made there, and they'll work through it. I'll share with you. Most people will work through the fact that you may have some windows that need replacing. If you tell them, hey, there's a few windows to be replaced, and that's just one example, right? So let's hop back into this again. Another thing we're talking about is broker and seller duties, right? Chapter 10 is pretty important. Broker agrees to exercise reasonable effort and due diligence to achieve the purposes of this agreement, okay? Unless seller gives broker written instructions to the contrary, broker is authorized but not required to order reports and disclosures, including those specified in 10E as necessary, and advertise and market any property by any method and medium selected by the broker. Again, that's telling you that you're getting some marketing. Get the marketing and understand the marketing that agent's going to do for your, because you do work for the broker. And disclose any real estate licensee making inquiry, the receipt of any offers on the property, and offering prices of such offers. Again, if those need to be in writing, the dissemination of information submitted to any medium, disclosed to any real estate licensing making an inquiry to receipt of any offers on the property and offering price of such offers. If you don't tell that agent not to tell people how many offers you have and what the things are, they can tell it. If you don't want it, then you need to make sure it's in writing in the agreement, and the confidentiality of any offers made on the property, right? Then we get into this: seller instructs broker not to present buyer's letters. I think it's really in the seller's best interest not to have, especially in a market where there's still more than one offer being presented on a house, not to have offer letters. I really think they're problematic, and I think you just have to look at the merits of the price and the terms, and not the sad story or happy beginnings or we're going to start our wonderful life nonsense. At the end, what you care about is that the house is sold in an orderly manner and for the price and the terms that everyone has agreed to without a lot of drama. That's ultimately what real estate agents are judged on, right? But I want to go over a section here that's really important, and I think it's something that is a big miss on the listing agreements and a big talk of the marketing piece of it, and it's a big liability issue for everybody involved, okay? And that is investigations and reports. In my practice, I am a huge believer of providing all the information on the property, and because the information is not problematic, it allows the buyer to basically have a Carfax on your house. They know what they're buying. If we're going to negotiate that, you're not going to compensate and make any repairs, and that is done up front, and we have all the inspections and the reports. That is a reasonable thing to counter back, and it's most likely going to happen. And I won't talk about as-is offers, but they are very problematic. And you really don't want to open the negotiations again. And more importantly, you don't want to have any surprises found out during the purchase. And so to me, having a seller agrees within 5 days from the beginning of this date of this agreement to order, and when required by the service provider, pay for a natural hazard disclosure report and the following reports: structural pest control, general property inspection, homeowner association docs, preliminary title, roof inspection, pool inspection, septic sewer inspection, other. There could be a well, there could be property lines. If property is located in a common interest development or homeowner association, sellers advise that there may be benefits to obtaining any required documents prior to entering into escrow with any buyer. Such benefits may include, but not be limited to, potentially being able to lower costs in obtaining the documents and avoiding any potential delays or complications due to late or slow delivery of such documents. That really applies to the HOA. Little insider secret. The documents are usually in a contract due to be delivered in a week to 10 days after the contract is accepted. Your HOA will never deliver those documents that quickly, and you will pay a few $100s expediting those documents. Now, personally, if you have the CC&Rs and the HOAs from the last sale or have the ability to share those, I think those will work out. But just be aware that the HOA is a big part of the sale and you will have to pay for those documents. And then here you go. Seller further agrees to indemnify, defend, and hold broker harmless from all claims, disputes, litigations, judgments, attorney's fees, and costs arising from incorrect or incomplete information supplied by seller, or from any material facts that seller knows but fails to disclose, including dangerous or hidden conditions on the property. So getting back to that material facts thing, you're, as a seller, if anything comes out of this agreement and it falls apart, you may have some blowback. So again, I'm a big believer in these pre-sale inspections. It really takes away a lot of the material facts are going to be discovered during these pre-sale inspections. I think they're a great way to go, but I don't know if you have an understanding of that you would be paying for them and that maybe you're getting reimbursed by the listing agent, or maybe there's a credit for those reports, but usually you're going to pay for them as well. So anyway, the last part, and I just raise this up because people think that when someone buys your house that you're going to get the deposit. Nope, the broker is authorized to accept and hold on seller's behalf any deposits to be applied towards the purchase price. Deposits usually are deposited in escrow or transferred to escrow, and so that's just another piece of this going on. So back to the form. This again was the investigation reports, all the things. I'm a big believer. Get these pre-sale inspection reports. It just creates a lot of goodwill and trust for these people spending the money that they're spending to buy a house, especially in this type of environment. And you get right down the road, right? So again, here's the agency relationships. We're going over them again, okay? Now, another piece that I want to share with you is this termination of agency relationships. Long story short, seller acknowledges and agrees that the representation duties of an agency relationship with broker terminate at the expiration of the agreement, and if it occurs first, the completion of any transaction specified in this agreement. So basically, there's no service after the sale. So when this thing transferred, your agent is basically delivers the keys, and pulls their sign and lockbox. They're pretty much done with your house. So if there is some agreement that you want them to, help the new buyer, for a month after the agreement, don't get it in writing, I guess, right? And here's another thing too. Security insurance, showings, audio, and video. This is another important piece. Broker is not responsible for loss or damage to personal or real property or persons, whether attributed to a use of a key, safe, lockbox, a showing of the property, or otherwise. Meaning, doors are going to be open, doors are going to be closed. They're going to be shown. I'm not responsible if someone comes in and uses a key box and make sure the house is locked up, all right? And you come home and the back door is open, or someone locked the garage door and you don't have a key and now you're locked out of your house, right? So a lot of stuff, in the security showing and audio visual. The other thing is that you need to is advised to post notice disclosing the existence of security devices. So again, if there's security in the house, that people need to know that there's security, and because they may not want to be videoed. And Again, another thing is sellers agree to take reasonable precautions to safeguard and protect valuables that might be accessible during showings of the property, to obtain insurance to protect against these risks. Open houses, one agent, 10 or 15 people in the house. That's the downside of open houses right then and there. Again, let's talk about photographs and internet advertising. In order to effectively market the property for sale, it is often necessary to provide photographs, virtual tours, and other media to the seller. Now, this is something I want to note, because you've seen that in the listing agreement, they talk about doing all these inspections, but did your agent ask you to do these inspections? Okay, might be something that makes you wonder about their marketing. Okay, here's another question. Are they going to ask, are they talking about virtual tours and other media? Are they talking about 3D Matterports? Are they talking about drones? Like some places, you can't drone the house because it's in the FAA flight zone, right? So you may want drones, but I know some places in Sacramento you can't fly a drone because it's on either the flight path for the military bases or for Sacramento Airport, right? So again, we're asking you for this stuff, right? Or that we're saying that it's available. And I guess the point I'm trying to make here, is it available, right? So again, as the other part in here is that, once these pictures are out on the internet, we don't have control of them. When they go to Zillow, we don't get to tell Zillow what the order of the photos are or which virtual tour to use if there's multiple virtual tours. So again, you have to ask yourself, if you're doing these 3D walkthroughs, and they are a priority on websites like Redfin and Zillow, if you have a virtual tour, the virtual tour may or may not be shown on the MLS. And so here you are, you paid for this great cinematic video only to find out it wasn't going to show up on Zillow, but you also did a 3D Matterport to walk through, and you're not a huge fan of it, but it's now showing instead of the cinematic. The bottom line is don't worry about the Matterport, because listings that have the 3D walkthroughs get a priority in the way that the listings are shown on Zillow and also on Redfin. So you probably want to do the 3D Matterport. Maybe you don't want the virtual tours. But again, the reason I go through this, right, is there's a lot of information and there's a lot of nuance to what is in this listing agreement. And a lot of the things that can be asked, were you asked? And did you really understand all the marketing? Did you really understand all the photographs and how they were going to be used? Did you really understand, which the next part is, the key box? And again, what does that mean? Okay, the key box is designed to hold a key and property to permit access to the property by broker, cooperating brokers, MLS participants, their authorized licensees and representatives, authorized inspectors, and company prospective buyers. Seller further agrees broker at broker's discretion and without further approval from seller shall have the right to grant access to and convey seller's consent to access the property to inspectors, appraisers, workers, repair persons, and other persons requiring entry to the property in order to facilitate the sale of the property. Broker, cooperating brokers, MLS, association, boards of realtors are not insured against injury, theft, loss, vandalism, damage attributed to the use of a key box, lockbox. So again, you're allowing us to have access to your house, and if you have valuables, medications, things that you don't want to disappear, you need to secure them, and that's the point of this again, right? Again, a lot of things to be done in regards to a listing agreement. Another thing here is whether or not it's an REO or a short sale or a trust advisory. And here's the first point where we talk about in additional terms. Seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property as part of any resulting transaction. This would also be a place where you would also want to talk about any rent back. Okay, a rent back is also part of this as well, and also discuss whether or not the property is going to be transferred at the close escrow, or you're going to opt into 3 days or a day after it closes to move all your stuff out, and so forth and so on. Another thing that I want to talk about is this form of management approval. So basically, unless you're dealing with the broker, okay, the salesperson or broker associate, which is what brokers have that work for another brokerage, enters into disagreement on broker's behalf and broker or manager does not approve of its term, broker or manager has a right to cancel this agreement in writing within 5 days after its execution. So basically, these agreements, even though the buyer, even though the seller has in good faith negotiated with the listing agent to do this commission and everything else, there may be a policy in the broker's office that won't allow that commission structure, and it's going to get rejected, and then the listing has the right to cancel it. Okay, so again, these agreements all have to be approved by the broker, the managing broker at the brokerage where these salespersons or associate brokers work at. I am the broker, so you sign the agreement, we're good. So let's talk about a few other things, which is the dispute resolution, okay? And again, this is something that is a little complicated, right? So you can agree to mediate any dispute or claim arising under this agreement before resorting to arbitration or court action. Mediation fees, if any, shall be divided equally among the parties, okay? And then additional mediation terms, the following matters shall be excluded from mediation: a judicial and non-judicial foreclosure or other action proceeding to enforce a deed of trust, mortgage or installment land sale contract as defined, and all unlawful detainer, a filing enforcement of a mechanics lien, in any matter that is a jurisdiction of probate, small claims, or bankruptcy court, the filing of a court action enabled recording of a notice of pending action for order of an attachment receivership. So basically, if you've got anything legally going on, mediation isn't an option. And then there is an arbitration advisory if seller and broker desire to resolve disputes arising between them through arbitration rather than court. There's an agreement for that. So you don't want to go to court, but you don't want mediation. You want someone to make a decision and it to be over and done. There is an arbitration form. I'm not going over that. So now we're back into this thing, which is the entire agreement. So all prior discussions, negotiations, agreements between the parties concerning the subject matter of the agreement are superseded by this agreement. So this agreement is now the binding thing. So if we didn't put it in this agreement, but we talked about it, then we need to fix it. But once we sign it, it's too late. Okay, that's what we're saying here. Okay. It constitutes the entire contract and a complete and exclusive expression of their agreement. It may not be contradicted by evidence of any prior agreement or contemporaneous oral agreement. If any provision of this agreement is to be held ineffective or invalid, the remaining provisions will nevertheless be given a full force and effect. This agreement and any supplemental addendum or modification, including a photocopy or facsimile, may be executed in counterparts, meaning we don't have to sign it in the same rooms and we can do little pieces here and there. At the end of the day, it's kind of sitting there saying, just if I fail you one thing, the agreement is still in full force. So again, this is a legal agreement. If you have any questions, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just saying this agreement is pretty much the way your property is going to be sold. And this agreement should be really fully understood. And if anything, if this seems rambling or on and on and on, this is not something that you should be signing without any questions. If you don't have any questions, I find it a little bit concerning that anyone reading this agreement wouldn't understand all the mediation and conflict resolution and how issues are handled and yada, yada, yada. So let's hop into it. We're getting down to the part where we're signing this thing. And it says ownership, title, and authority. Seller warrants that the seller is the owner of the property. No other persons or entities have title to the property, and seller has the authority to execute this agreement and sell the property. Exceptions to the ownership, title, and authority are as follows. If there's any exceptions, that becomes pretty problematic, and chances are we don't have a legal agreement unless all the parties have signed the agreement, right? And then the legally authorized signer represents that the entity for which the person is acting already exists and is in good standing to do business in California and shall deliver to broker within 3 days after the execution of this agreement evidence of authority to act in such capacity, but not limited to applicable portions of the trust or certification of trust, letters, testimony, court order, power of attorney, corporate resolution, formation documents of a business entity. And here's the big part. By signing below, seller acknowledges that the seller has read, understands, receives a copy, and agrees to the terms of this agreement. So that's a whole bunch of mouthful here, right? And again, this is a legal agreement. This is a binding listing to have a person working for a broker, is a licensed salesperson by the Department of Real Estate working for a licensed brokerage in the state of California to sell your house. And there is a whole bunch of terms, conditions, and a lot of legal information here, and responsibilities and duties. And they, your agent just doesn't do it all, but your agent has to show a lot of contractual and transactional competencies, and their experience does matter. Their experience does matter when it comes to picking them as a listing agent. And again, we have another thing here that you're an entity seller. What does that mean? That one or more sellers in a trust or corporation, LLC, probate, partnership, it holds the power of attorney. And then you'll have the seller signatures, right? And then you'll have the broker signatures. And then there's one last thing, and you've signed everything, right? It just goes on and on, right? These are really your, this is a seller's advisory. This advisory addresses the many things you may need to think about as you do and market your property, right? General disclosure duties. You must affirmatively disclose to the buyer or seller all known facts that are materially affect the valuable or desirability of your property. You must disclose these facts whether or not asked about such matters by the buyer, any broker, or anyone else. The duty to disclose applies even if the buyer agrees to purchase your property in its present condition without requiring you to make any repairs. Again, any surprises made in an as-is sale basically is not part of the as-is sale. So again, it's probably a good idea to have some of these pre-sale inspections, because if stuff shows up, they may, if your broker discovers something that could indicate a problem, your broker must advise the buyer. So again, these are really a lot of duties that sellers have. You must timely prepare and deliver the buyer the TDS and the NHD, and in our contract, you'll also, the purchase contract says an SPQ, and then depending on the age and type of construction of your property, you may have to be required to provide, in certain cases, you can receive limited legal protection by providing the buyer with booklets entitled The Homeowner's Guide to Earthquake Safety, The Commercial Property Guide, Owner's Guide to Earthquake Safety, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, Environmental Hazards, a guide for homeowners and buyers. There's a whole bunch of booklets that your listing agent needs to make sure that the buyer's agent and buyers have received these booklets. And a lot of them have to do with the NHD, is that if your property natural hazard disclosure, a third party thing that will tell you if you're within 1 mile of a former military ordnance location, for example. If the TDS, NHD, or lead or military ordnance, commercial zone, or special tax disclosure are provided to the buyer after you accept the buyer's offer, the buyer will have 3 days after delivery or 5 days if mailed to terminate the offer. Okay, so again, a little nuance here, right? If you have the NHD before the person has received them, then they can cancel the contract after they receive them. So you may have a 5-day inspection window, and then they don't get the NHD until day 5 or the disclosure. They can still cancel the contract, right? And we also go over some other things in this contract, which is death and other disclosures, okay, which is where you have to notify a potential buyer or a buyer about whether there's been a death on the property and the terms of that. And then also we circle back to other common interest subdivisions like planned unit developments and stuff, common interest subdivisions about the provide the buyer copies of governing documents, the most recent financial statements distributed, and other documents required by law or contract. So again, you have an obligation to do that. And then the last part of this really comes down to some of the contract terms and legal requirements. You basically, this gets back to as is again. A buyer may request as part of the contract for sale of your property that you pay for repairs to the property and other items. Your decision on whether or not to comply with the buyer's request may affect your ability to sell your property at a specified price. So again, this is talking about repairs. I mean, a lot of times we can make a contract saying that it's as is with no financial contribution, but the only remedy for that, if the repairs are not agreed, is to basically cancel the contract. And so again, as is a beautiful thing until it becomes problematic, and then it is always subject to renegotiation unless you really have done a outstanding job of making all these disclosures and reports available before the contract is written, and also that the buyer acknowledges receipt of these disclosures and contracts, or disclosures and reports with the submittal of a contract. But again, that gets back to the way your agent works and the competency of your agents. Now, a couple of interesting pieces of this is the legal requirements that I wanted to go through here. Is the buyer may request buyer may request as part of a contract for sale of your property that you pay for repairs to the property and other items. Your decision on whether or not we did that. Withholding taxes. This is often a big surprise. There are withholding federal and California tax laws that a buyer is required to withhold a portion of the purchase price from your sale proceeds for tax purposes unless you sign an affidavit of non-foreign status and California residency or some other exemption applies and/or document. There are specific rules that you have to have lived in your house as your primary residence for a certain amount of time in the last 5 years. If you do that, it's your primary residence. If it hasn't, then you may be surprised by the withholding, and there's nothing you can do to get out of there. But again, that's something you should be discussing during the listing, that this is your primary residence, or this is a rental, or that you reoccupied the house and you're currently paying the taxes, all that stuff. It's a talking point, right? Another thing is, under state law, property owners with limited exemptions are required to install operable smoke alarms and water heaters, provide a buyer with a statement of compliance. Existing operable smoke alarms that met compliance standards when installed do not have to be removed, even if they're not up to current legal requirements. Smoke alarms that have been added or replaced older versions must comply with the current law and install carbon monoxide detection devices. Some city governments may impose additional requirements, including but not limited to low flow toilets and shower heads, gas shutoff valves, tempered glass banners around swimming pools and spas. You should consult with appropriate governmental agencies, inspectors, and other professionals to determine which requirements apply to your property, extent to your property complies, and such requirements and or costs of any compliance. Again, I can't speak enough about having pool inspections, roof inspections, home inspections, pest inspections, sewer inspections. It really makes sure that you're compliant and that you're not selling any problems. And more importantly, if you do find out there's things that need to be addressed, you really know what the costs are going to be. So back into it, this is the thing about pre-78 housing. If there's a lead disclosure thing that you'll have to sign, and there's some rules about that, and about how EPA's lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting rule. And then the other thing again, and I hope, I know I've beat this into the ground a little bit, but this is really key. Pre-sale inspection and consideration. And I just want to read the underlined part. Many people are not aware of the defects or problems with their own property. One way to make yourself aware is to obtain professional inspections prior to sale. Pre-sale inspections may include a general property inspection, an inspection for wood-destroying pests and organisms, structural pest control report, and an inspection of the septic or well systems, if any, among other things. By doing so, you may have the opportunity to make repairs for your property sold, which may enhance its marketability. So again, I don't want to overstress it, but I am. Knowing what you're selling is so key to selling quickly in this market. One of the biggest problems or challenges of selling is there's an inspection time period in the contract. And it becomes really problematic if these inspections are done with a big unknown. When you do these pre-sale inspections, you know. Now, it doesn't preclude the buyer from doing additional inspections, but there shouldn't be any really big surprises. And then in some cases, if there are some surprises, you may not have some additional costs. So again, I cannot share with you enough that I'm a huge fan of pre-sale inspections. I'm a big fan of basically Carfaxing your home, and you should really strongly consider doing these pre-sale inspections. And you should also question your agent why they're not asking for these pre-sale inspections, because they release you from a lot of material facts and issues with selling your house if this information is out there. Another piece that I think is something to be considered is a warranty, a home protection warranty plan for the property. I think that gives a sort of a feeling of trust, or that you're selling somebody a well-maintained home and nothing's going to break after the close. And in some cases, you can get these warranties during the sale. So if a well goes out, or you have a problem with your appliances, guess what? You're covered. So I would tell you that a home protection warranty plan isn't a bad idea. Now, the last thing that I want to share with you is advertising and marketing your property for sale, including but not limited to holding open houses, placing a key box, lockbox, erecting for sale signs, and disseminating photographs, videotapes, and virtual tours of the premises may jeopardize your personal safety and that of your property. You know, we live in a new world, so it isn't like your personal safety isn't have some risk or exposure when you list your house. The other part is that you are advised expenses. You are advised that you, not the broker, are responsible for the fees and costs, if any, to comply with your duties and obligation to the buyer of your property. I.e., don't count on a buyer credit or from the agent or the broker to compensate for these repairs. It can be really problematic if you're depending on your agent to contribute to any of these things. They may be able to give you a credit, but that's totally different than who's responsible for the costs. So the last bit that we're going to go through is the last form is about your privacy and your personal identification or personal information. And basically we have you sign a form about that. And there's certain laws about what needs to be known. But if you really want to know what is collected by whom, it basically says your personal information is broadly defined to encompass non-public records and that could reasonably be linked or indirectly linked to you. PI potentially includes photograph or sales information about your property. So we are putting your property out there. So this has been a pretty darn longest thing that I have ever done to sell the property, and I've spent an hour and a half doing it, over an hour and a half. And at the end of the day, this is something that tragically happens, that in 15 minutes, where I've taken over an hour and a half to explain this form, or the forms with the listing agreement. So with that, I would really appreciate if you leave me any comments or any helpful tips that you think I could have done better. I really would appreciate if you would consider subscribing to my YouTube channel at Cliff Stanwyck Real Estate, or my Facebook, or go to my website, stanwyckre.com. I'm trying to make people more aware of all the responsibilities that selling real estate encompasses, from the listing agent to the buyer's agent, and trying to deliver some value here so that you can make the best decision when you go to sell your house and when you go to buy a home. So with that, I'm ending this very long video, and I wish you the best of luck in your hunt for real estate. Thank you.